Hey everyone, happy Friday and welcome to today's immigration chat. I am attorney Lillian Chukura of Lily Legal, where we help our clients get status for themselves and for their families using the U.S. immigration law system. So, today, I want to talk to you about some myths that I have been getting so much of lately in my practice with new clients, with current clients, that I want to make sure that you don't fall into the trap of believing these myths. Okay. So, that is what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to cover five of them. One of them does have a part two, but you'll understand. Okay. So, that is what we're going to be talking about today. As always, if you would like to schedule a private consultation with me, you can do that by going to the links in the description to this video. But without further ado, let's jump right in. Okay. So, one of the first myths that I want to cover is the myth that you or your spouse have to change your last name. So typically, this happens in heterosexual relationships where the woman is expected to take their husband's last name when they get married. Well, immigration doesn't really focus on that so much because we live in 2022 where there is so much more going on in relationships, and USCIS understands that changing your name does not actually mean that your marriage is real or that it's not real. So, if you want to change your last name when you get married, you are free to do that. USCIS has no issues with you doing that, right? But if you do not want to change your last name, it is not a requirement. Okay, that's the first myth. It is not a requirement. You do not have to change your last name in order to start your marriage based filings. If you do change your last name, you want to actually go through the full process of changing your name. So, what typically happens is people will choose to change their name on the marriage license. So, if you look at your marriage certificate, it will say like your current name, your name after marriage, right? If your name after marriage is different from your current name, guess what that means? You need to actually go through the process of changing your name. So, the first step of that is typically with the Social Security Administration, updating your name there first, right? Change your name with the Social Security Administration, and then you can change your license, passport, anything else that you need to change. But the first step, if you are going to change your name, is to also do it with the Social Security Administration, so that it's actually when USCIS looks up your Social Security number, it does have your new last name there. But do you have to go through that process? If you do not want to change your last name, you do not have to, because you have other ways, right? You have other ways to show that your marriage is real. Again, if you've been watching my videos for any time frame, you know I go over those ways with you all the time. So just know changing your name is not one of those requirements. It's not do or die. I do have plenty of people that change their name and plenty of people that do not change their name, and it does not affect their case one way or the other. Okay. So the next one that I want to press for you is the myth that you have to wait a certain amount of time after you get married before you file your application. USCIS does not have a time frame of how long you have to be married before you can file. Okay. There's no you must be married for 3 months or you must be married for a year before you can start the process. That is not a requirement by USCIS. And I've had a lot of people come to me that believe that they have to wait a certain amount of months before they start the process. The truth of the matter is, there's no specific time frame, right? However, right? I always have to put the however, right? However, if you and your spouse do not have a lot of documentation together, if you two have not started living together yet, if you two do not have a joint bank account yet, you may want to start that process um, first and then file. But, but you can open your bank account, show proof that you have a joint bank account when you're filing. Go ahead and file your application, and then at your interview, bring the bank statements for the typically it in Massachusetts right now it's taking anywhere from 9 months to 16 months for a green card interview to be scheduled. Okay. So if you open your bank account the day you get married and you decide to file like a week later, that's completely fine, right? That is completely fine. Because when you get ready for your interview, guess what? Like I said, in some places it's taking 9 months to 16 months to get an interview. So that means you have 9 months to 16 months of bank statements that you can show to prove that your marriage is real. Right? You have 9 months to 16 months of whatever other type of documents. You have that time frame to get other things to show that your marriage is real. You have that time to change, your election at your work as far as like married versus single, adding your spouse to your insurance, adding your spouse as a dependent on anything else through your job. You have the 9 months to a year and a half to get that done, right? So it's not that you have to wait until you have all those things in place to file. However, if you are, so I'm going to use the bank statement as an example. If you are going to open a bank account and if you are going to include that as part of your initial application, make sure, like I always say, that you use the bank account. If you do not plan on using the bank account, do not include it. Like, what's the point? Because you're going to go to the interview, the officer is going to expect months and months and months of bank statements because you included that you have a joint bank account, and there's no months of bank statements showing that you actually use the account. So it's not helpful to you to have a joint bank account or to include documentation of a joint bank account if you are not actually going to use the joint bank account. Okay. I can't make that clear enough. If you're not going to use it, don't even bother including it as an evidence for your case. Okay. The next myth I want to burst for you is that you have to, again, like I said, you have to have all your accounts before you file. No, you do not have to have all your accounts before you file. Get to the interview, there is an expectation that because you had the account right after you got married, that it is going to, you're going to produce a specific number of months of bank statements. So just keep that in mind. Let's say you two got married in January. So that's fine. Let's say you got married January of 2022. When you file your 2021 taxes, you're going to file as single, right? Or head of household, depending on if you had dependents, right? However, if your interview is not till, let's say, April of 2023, your tax return should be married filing jointly or married filing separately. That's just an expectation that's had by USCIS, right? So if you're filing after, if you're getting married in January of a certain year, of course, the previous years you weren't married, so your tax returns will say single or head of household if you qualify for that. However, moving forward, right, if your interview is not till after the next year's tax return is due, there's an expectation that when you file your return for that year, it is not going to say single. It is not going to say head of household. And the reason being, well, one, you're not single, you're married. And two, right? Two, if you are filing head of household, that means in order for you to qualify for head of household, if you look at the IRS rules, in order for you to qualify as head of household, you and your spouse cannot have lived together for the last 6 months of the year. That's the IRS rules. So if you are filing head of household while you're living with your spouse, married, or at least you're presenting to USCIS that you are married to your spouse and you two have been living together all year round, it does not make sense that now you are filing head of household, because it violates IRS rules. And guess what? USCIS knows that. Okay. They know when someone can file single, when someone can file married, filing jointly, married filing separately, and head of household. They know those things. So just keep that in mind when you're filing your returns, when you're preparing your documentation, that even though you don't have to have all of that to start the process, there is an expectation that you will have it months down the line or even a year after filing. So, again, I'm just going to reiterate, if you are married and living with your spouse, there's no reason you should be filing single, and there's almost no reason you should be filing head of household. But talk to a tax professional, tell them exactly your living situation with your spouse, and they will give you the right filing status. You are allowed to file separately from your spouse, so you can do married filing separately. However, head of household is a gray area. It is murky. You really want to stay away from that. Single is definitely a no no if you are married, unless, right? There's still situations where you could file single, but you need to talk to a tax professional. You need to talk to an accountant before making that decision. You should not be filing your return without getting a clear opinion from a tax professional or an accountant if you are looking to file single or head of household while you're married. Okay, so make sure you're getting that tax advice before you file your return so that you do not fall into that little trap. Now, the next myth is you cannot file your return, you cannot file your application if you have an expired passport. So, what typically happens is a non immigrant comes to the US, maybe on a visiting visa, and they have, their passport lasts for 10 years, and they have like 2 years left on their passport. And by the time they go to file, it's been 5 years and their passport is now expired. Can you start the process with an expired passport? And the answer to that question is yes. Okay. Yes, you can start the process with an expired passport. However, you may want to go ahead and renew your passport just so you have some form of proof of identification. Okay. So if you don't have a license that can, or a state ID or something else that has your picture and your biographic information as proof of ID, you do need to go ahead and renew your passport. However, you don't have to renew it before filing. So you can be in the process of renewing it while you're starting your immigration process. So just keep that in mind when you do go for your fingerprint appointment or when you do go for your interview, they will need some form of ID. Okay. So that's the only thing there. You don't have to, you know, renew your passport before you file. However, you should renew it just so you have some form of unexpired proof of ID. Okay, so that's that myth. And then the next one is You need to earn a lot of money to sponsor your spouse. And I love this myth because it really comes up a lot with people that actually make enough money to sponsor their spouse. I would have someone that makes like 40,000 a year, no dependents. It's just them and their spouse, and they would be so worried that they're not making enough money for immigration purposes. And yeah, no. So when it comes to affidavit of support, income level, you really just have to be above the poverty line. Okay, let me repeat that. You have to be above the poverty line for your household size. So if it's just you and then you're sponsoring your spouse, one person, now there's two people in that household, right? If you have children that live with you or children that are dependents of you, um, then you would need to add them to that household size to determine exactly how much you actually need in order to sponsor your spouse. Okay. Like I said, if it's just you and your spouse, it's, I believe right now it's like 21,000. So if you have like 25,000 in income, that's plenty. Okay. So you really just have to be above the poverty line for your household size. If you guys want, I can do a whole video just breaking down the affidavit of support income requirements, because I know a lot of people believe this myth that they have to be making like, you know, 50,000 or more in order to sponsor one person. And it really just depends. I know that is the lawyer answer, right? I have people that tell me, "Oh, I want to sponsor my mother, but I don't know if my income is enough." My first question is, how many people are in your household? Right? Because that determines how much you actually have to have in income. If you're a single person and you're sponsoring one person, your income doesn't have to be that high. Okay? It does have to be above the poverty line. However, it doesn't have to be like, 10,000 above the poverty line in order for you to be able to sponsor that person. So it's really important that when you're talking about affidavit of support or thinking about sponsoring someone, you are talking to a lawyer that can actually look at your income, your household size, and be able to decide if that's enough or if you will need a joint sponsor. Now, the part two of this is when people need a joint sponsor, but they are worried that having a joint sponsor would weaken their case. Okay, I have had this. I have had people ask me about this. Does having a joint sponsor weaken my case? And the answer is no, it doesn't. It just means that you have now shown USCIS that, okay, even though my income may not be enough, there's someone else that's willing to support my spouse if that becomes an issue. Okay. Again, most of the time it doesn't come to that because the person gets their green card, they're able to work, they typically become self-sufficient, apply for citizenship. Once they're a citizen, that's it. The joint sponsor, the affidavit of support sponsor, their responsibility goes away. So that's something to keep in mind. Your joint sponsor does not weaken your case, even though some people may tell you otherwise. It really doesn't. I've had cases with joint sponsors, and that officer doesn't really care as long as the income is the right income amount. Okay, as long as the income is sufficient to meet the requirements for the household size. So, again, if you're going to have a joint sponsor, you also have to look at your joint sponsor's household size because that still matters. Okay. So, just keep that in mind when you're filing and you may need a joint sponsor. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid to use a joint sponsor if you need one. Okay. In some situations, it is necessary. necessary, others it may not be. So does USCIS look at, oh, they have a joint sponsor, let's not approve this? No, because the law says you can have a joint sponsor. So therefore, they can't use it against you for having a joint sponsor. Okay. And then the last bonus one, which is one of my favorites. And I swear I get this question all the time, especially when I do the videos or talk about interviews, right? Marriage interviews. I get this question all the time, which is people believing that when you go to your interview and the officer calls you and your spouse in separately, that means something is wrong with your case. People believe this. I just want to burst that myth right now. It does not mean that something is wrong with your case if the officer calls you in first and then calls your non-immigrant spouse in second. Like, it is not, it does not make a difference, right? It does not determine whether the officer is going to approve your case or not. I've had people called in together, I've had people called in separately, and both get approved, right? So when you're called in separately, the goal is for the officer is to basically make sure that they can approve your case. Make sure that you and your spouse know each other. They may have documentation that shows that, okay, you have a joint bank account, okay, you have a lease together, but they're still like, okay, I need more information, right? I need to make sure that you two actually know each other before this, before I can go ahead and approve this. And that's really all the interview calling you separately is all about. The officer calls in the US citizen first, asks them a bunch of questions about themselves, about your relationship, how you met, all of that. Then they call you in, the non US citizen in, and ask you the same exact questions. There's no, oh, I'm going to get you with this question. No, it's usually questions about your life, right? Questions you will know if you live together, questions you will know if you've spent the amount of time together that you've told the officer that you have spent together. That's really it, right? It is scary. I'm not going to, it is scary to go through that interview. I think one day I'll talk to y'all about going through our interview to come to the US. When my dad filed for my mom and us, and we had to go to an interview in Nigeria to get a visa to the US. Oh my goodness, was that nerve wracking? But I think I'm gonna do a whole video talking about that, because I just want you all to understand that it does not make a difference. It does not stop your application if you're called separately, right? It is a nerve-wracking process. Any little different, if you get to the interview and the officer asks you something that you weren't expecting, or things go away that you're not expecting, it is going to throw you off. It is going to make you a little more nervous. However, that does not mean anything is wrong with your case. It just means the officer may just want to do things a little differently. So I'll give you an example. I had a marriage case where it's time to remove the condition. They had a 2-year green card. It's time to remove the condition. We sent a bunch of documents when it was time to remove the condition that basically showed, hey, 2 years later, we're still married. We're still, building a life together. We still have our joint bank account. We still, basically growing as a couple. And they get to the interview, and the officer calls the US citizen in first, and they just have a conversation. It wasn't anything like drilling them. It was a very like, so tell me about your spouse. Tell me about your life together. Oh, simple questions. And then they call in the non-US citizen spouse, and the questions were just going through the forms, making sure there's no nothing that needed to be changed, and having her sign the forms, and that was it. Okay, so even though they were called in separately, they could have been called in together and had the same process. So being called in separately does not mean that your application is going to be denied. It does not mean that anything is wrong with your case. Like the couple that I was talking about, she has her 10-year green card now. She's most likely going to be applying for citizenship like right away, because she qualifies for it. But the thing to keep in mind is being called separately at your interview does not mean, okay, it does not mean that your application is deficient. It does not mean that your application will not be approved. It is a nerve-wracking situation. I I understand that, but just know it does not make a difference in your case if you're called separately or together. It just means the officer has some questions, and all you have to do is answer them truthfully and consistently, right? You and your spouse have to answer the questions the same way, and the officer will be happy. That's it. So, those are the myths I wanted to burst for you today. If you have any questions, as always, go ahead and put it in the comments. If you want to schedule a time to speak with me personally, you can do that. All the links are in the description to this video. And as always, if you like this video, go ahead and hit the like button. If you know someone who needs to hear this, go ahead and share this video with them. And if you are watching in a place where you can subscribe, go ahead and subscribe so that you do not miss any of my future uploads or lives. And once again, I am Lillian Chukura. I am the owner of Lily Legal, and we do immigration law and we do it well. Thank you. Bye.